This is all the notes for chapter 4. It will be due at the end of class. You guys are having a quiz on this on Wednesday, which, let me tell you the dates, is the 8th. Okay, your quiz is just on chapter 4, so you have a lot of review time because it is a lot of rules. And the quiz is on the 8th, which is a Wednesday, next week Wednesday. All right. This chapter has to do with transformations. We're only covering translations, reflections, and rotations. So looking at this information, transformation, a function that moves or changes a figure in some way to produce a new figure. So you're starting with your original figure, which is considered your pre-image, and then you're going to your image, which is your new figure. It'll be represented as letters with like little apostrophes. So I'm going to give you an example. So this is my original figure, and I'm going to draw it for you. And then we're going to our new figure. So what does that look like? Here's my original figure. Let's just say we're using a triangle. I have A, B, and C. That's my original figure. And then I'm going to my new figure. So I'm just going to draw it. Let's just say this was a type of transformation. Let's say it was a reflection. And normally it'll be represented with those little apostrophes at the top. So looking at it, these little apostrophes are what is going to tell you you're going to your new image. All right, looking at the next section, we have rigid and non-rigid motions. You have to know the difference. Rigid motion does not change the size, okay? It doesn't change the size of the shape, but when it's non-rigid, it changes the size of the shape. Normally this has to do with dilation, because dilation is getting larger or smaller. But all the other transformations that we're dealing with are rigid motions. The size is not changing, but where it is on my coordinate plane does change. Okay, so the size is not changing for these, and that's a rigid motion. All right, these are the 3 types of transformations that we're working with. We have translations, reflections, rotations. This should not be anything new. You guys have definitely seen this in middle school, hopefully. But if not, here it is, so you know it. But if you did see it, like I said before, you should probably know how to find some of these or know what kind of movement they're doing. So the first one is translation, which is a slide. Okay, so if you're looking at the diagram to the right, that is a slide on the graph. So I'm going from my original to my new image. And we could tell, again, my new image is the one with the apostrophes. So my original to my new, this is going to be my new image right here. How am I finding this out? When you're looking at this, there is a rule in order to find your translation. So normally when you're solving it, you have your x values, because remember we're still dealing with coordinates, your y values, and you're either adding and subtracting a number to both. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So we know going up and down. We know if I'm going down, it's going to be subtraction. Think of a number line. If I'm going up, I'm adding. If I'm going to the left, I'm subtracting. If I'm going to the right, I'm adding. So that's something that you should know. I'm going to write it up here. Your x values are moving always left and right. Okay, so your x values move left or right. And if I'm going to the left, am I adding or subtracting? Again, think of a number line. If I go to the left, adding or subtracting? Good, subtracting. If I'm going to the right, I'm adding. Your y values move up or down. So if I'm going up, I'm adding. If I'm going down, I'm subtracting. So how are we finding out the information for this diagram? Normally, if I was giving you a question, I probably would not give you the coordinates for the new image, or maybe I would and say, what was my rule? What's the rule? What's the movement? What are you doing? So looking at this one, I'm first going to start out with my coordinates. I have A, B, and C. I need to figure out my coordinates for A. Does anybody know how to find the coordinates for A? A is this point right here. This is going to be 0, 3. Can somebody tell me the coordinates for B?
2, 4.
Good. 2, 4. And what about C? 1, 0. All right. Those are my original coordinates. I need to figure out the rule. When you're finding the rule, you're starting with your X and your Y, and you're making some sort of change. So I have my X, my Y. Now I need to figure out, what am I adding, what am I subtracting? So normally when I look at this, I'm starting here, and I need to figure out how I'm getting from this A to my new A. Like I said, your X's are going left and right, so that's what I'm going to do first. And if I'm going here, I know I'm going to go to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I went to the right 5 times. That means I'm going to add 5. So plus 5. And then looking at it again, I stopped here. I'm going down 1. So now I'm going to subtract 1 for my Y. So this is my rule. Okay, right here. This is my rule. This is my rule. So that means in order for me to solve for my new points, I'm going to follow that same rule. I'm going to take the coordinates of my original points, which I have 0, 3, 2, 4, 1, 0, and I'm going to plug in my rule. I'm adding 5 to all my X values, and I'm subtracting 1 to all my Y values. Now I'm solving it for my new image. 0 plus 5, that's going to give me my 5. 3 minus 1, that's going to give me 2. And this is my A. My B, I'm going to have 7, 3. And my C, I'm going to have 6, -1. So if I were to check this with my diagram, it would be correct. So you have to be able to find your rule for translation. Any questions on translations? Again, it's just a slide. Your image should be the same exact image. You're just moving it somewhere on the coordinate plane. All right, looking at the next one, this is a reflection. So you're using a line of reflection. Think of a mirror. You're kind of flipping the image. If you guys have ever done that, where you put the paint on one side of the paper and you fold it, that's called a reflection. And the folded part is considered my line of reflection. So when you're looking at reflections, it's normally going to tell you the line of the reflection, and then you have to figure out what your new points would be. For reflection, these are the rules right here. I suggest you highlight it because you're going to have to memorize it. All of these rules are for reflection. So I know they have A, B's, but your A is considered your X value and your B's are considered your Y values. So when you're looking at this, if it's reflected over the X-axis, all you're doing is changing the sign of your B, which is considered your Y value. When you're reflecting it over your Y-axis, you're changing the sign of your A. If it's reflecting where it says Y equals a value that is x, you're flipping them, and you'll see an example. I'll do an example like this as we get further. And then the same thing for this one, y equals negative x. You're flipping them and the signs are changing. Keep in mind if you have a negative number, let's say for the first one right here, that y value was -4. Negative times a negative will turn into a positive. So you have to know the rule of integers. So these are definitely something you have to memorize. And like I said, with practice, you guys will be able to get it. Looking at rotation, there are 4 quadrants in a coordinate plane, okay? And each quadrant is technically 90 degrees if you're rotating something. So you need to be able to figure out, am I rotating at 90 degrees, 180 degrees, or 270 degrees? And with the rotation, these are the rules of rotation. Again, highlight it because you're going to have to study this. Translations are normally the easiest ones because it's just a slide, you're figuring out the movement, but for these, you do have to know the rules because you may get questions regarding the rules on your quiz and test. So if you're looking at it, if you're rotating something 90 degrees, whether it's clockwise or counterclockwise, you're changing the order and negating your B. If you're rotating something 180 degrees, you're just changing the sign of your values. And if you're rotating at 270 degrees, you're switching them and changing the sign of your x value. So when they have A's and B's, we should know that our A's, I'll write it on here. Your A is your x, and your B is your y. You should know how to do coordinates. All right, questions on these. It has a lot of rules that you do have to practice. Guys, if you don't practice this, you're not going to know it. So please make sure you're practicing this because it is a lot of information to practice and changing of signs and switching of values. So please make sure you're practicing it. All right, we're going to do some examples. It says identify the translation. So they want us to figure out is it rotation, reflection, or translation, and what's the rule. So let's go ahead and do the first one. Looking at number 1, can someone tell me what type of transformation is number 1? Is it a translation, which is a slide? It is a reflection, or is it a rotation? It's a reflection. So looking at it, you can see it's kind of flipped. So if I were to fold this paper, it's like a stamp in some way. So looking at it, I'm going to state that this is a reflection. And where would I be folding this? If it's a reflection on what? It's a reflection on my y-axis. So go back and look at the rule if you don't remember the rule for reflecting over your y-axis. The rule is you have x, y, that's where you're starting for your coordinates. And you're moving to now negating your x, and you're leaving your y value. So I need to figure out my coordinates. Looking at this, I know they didn't write ABC again with a little apostrophe, so I'm just going to change it because the EDF is a little confusing. So I'm changing this to, I'm just going to get a white pen and take this out so we're not confused. So I'm changing it to A, B, and C. This is how it would be represented on a test or quiz. All right, so I'm going to start with my original coordinates. My pre-image, I have A, and my coordinates for A are what? What are my coordinates for A? You have to know how to read a coordinate plane and find your ordered pairs. What would it be for A?
-2, -1.
-2, -1. What about B? Good. And C.
42.
Good. All right. Now I'm going to my new image. I don't even have to look at the graph. I don't have to look at the graph if I don't want to, or if it's not given to me. I could figure this out on my own. So the rule was changing the sign of your x and leaving your y. So I know my y is going to be -1. What would my rule be for x? What would my x be for my new image? Think about it. You have a negative, -2. What would that change to? It would change to a +2. Good. Looking at B, what would my coordinates be? Again, you're changing the sign, so it'll be +1, and you're keeping your y. And C, what would it be? 2, -5. And I'm going to write that this is A, B, and C. So again, once you know the rules, it's pretty easy. On your homework, you're not always going to be given the graph. You're going to be given the rule. So you have to know how to graph information. All right, looking at number 2, what kind of transformation is number 2? Is it a reflection, rotation, or a translation? Good, it's a slide. It's some sort of slide. It's some sort of movement that's sliding. This is a translation. And I'm going from triangle LMN to triangle LMN. So I'm going from my original to my new. Keep in mind, they are giving you the colors, but on your test or quiz, you're not going to get blue and red. You're either going to get one with an apostrophe or one without an apostrophe. So you have to know which one's your original and which one's your new. So looking at this, your original is the one that does not have the apostrophes. I need to figure out my rule. I have my x and my y. And then my rule is going to be, remember, with translations, you're either adding or subtracting. So if I'm starting here for M, I'm going to go right and left first. Should I go right or should I go left? Am I going right or am I going left? I'm going left. So if I'm going left, I know that means I'm subtracting. And I need to figure out how many points am I subtracting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm subtracting 5. And then I need to go up, which I'm adding. I stopped right here. 1, 2. So this is my rule. -5 plus 2. And I'm going to go ahead and plug it into my coordinates. I have L, which is 1, -1. I have M, which is 4, 1. And then I have N, which is 5, -1. And now I'm solving it. I'm going to get my new with the apostrophe. And I'm solving it. I'm subtracting 5 and I'm adding 2. If you want to write it underneath, that's fine. Or you can just write them to the side. You have 1 minus 5. -1 plus 2. So solving it, my answer is going to be -4, 1. Solving the next one, 4 minus 5, 1 plus 2. I'm going to get -1, 3. And then solving the last one, 5 minus 5, -1 plus 2. 0, 1. Any questions on translation? Honestly, translation is the easiest one. All right, and looking at the last one, what should the last one be? What is the last one going to be? Obviously, it's not a reflection. It's not a translation. So it has to be rotation. All right, now we need to figure out what kind of rotation is this. We need to figure out how many degrees am I rotating. Like I said, every quadrant, there are 4 quadrants, every quadrant is 90 degrees. So the first rotation would have been somewhere right here. So that's 90. This is 180. And I rotated 270 degrees. So this is a rotation, a 270 degree rotation. And if you need to go back and look at the rule for rotation for 270, the rule is going to be X, Y. And for this, you are flipping your X and Y. And you are negating your X.
How do you know it's 270?
Because it's not, each quadrant is 90 degrees. So think of it as how many times am I moving to get here. So they're giving me the arrow. They're telling me it's going this way. If this rotated 90 degrees, it would be where this first circle is. So like you're moving it here, that's 90, then 180, then 270. All right, so now I have to follow my rule. I'm starting with my original, and then I'm going to my new. So my original, I'm going to have R. Coordinates for R is 3, 1. S, 5, 1. T, 5, -3. And U, 2, -1. All right. Again, I could just follow the rule. I don't need to look at the coordinates. I don't need to look at my coordinate plane. All I'm doing is switching them and changing the sign of my X. Would someone like to try the first one? What would my coordinates be for R, my new R? Let me write R prime. 1, -3, good. What about S? 1, -5. T, -3, -5. And the last one, U. -1, -2. If you want to check it, you're more than welcome to check it. But following the rule, we got our answer. All right, questions on any 3 of these examples? No? Okay, good. All right, example number 2, it says graph the triangle with the vertices. So vertices, if we don't know what vertices are, they're the corners. And the image after the translation. So you guys can flip back and forth. I'm going to first figure out my coordinates, and then I'm going to graph it. So these are my original. I'm going to write them down. I'm doing number 1. We'll just do it in blue. I have P, what is it? P, Q, and R. So let me make it a little smaller. I have P, which was -2, 3. Q, which is 1, 2. And R, which was 3, -1. So now I'm solving it using this rule. I'm going to get my new image of everything. So my rule is adding 4, subtracting 2. I'm just going to write it at the bottom so I have some space. But if you guys like to write it out to the side, that's up to you. So what would my new image be for P? What would my new coordinates be? What's -2 plus 2? I'm sorry, -2 plus 4. -2 plus 4. It would be 2. And then what's 3 minus 2? Good, 1. Those are my new images. This is my new coordinates now. What about Q? 5. 0, good. And what about R? 7. It's positive 7 because it's 3 plus 4. Yeah. And then it would be negative 3. Good. I just found my new coordinates. We're going to graph it on the next slide, but I'm just going to find all my coordinates before I graph. All right, number 2, reflected over the x-axis. For this, you have to remember the rule. If you want to go back, you're more than welcome to go back and look. The rule is x, y, and then I have my x value staying the same. I'm just changing the sign of my y. That's the rule for reflecting over the x-axis. So this is for my x-axis. So I again have my P, my Q, and my R. For your homework, this is how you have to show your work. If you're not showing your work, it's going to be wrong. So if I'm showing my work, you guys can show your work. All right, now I'm going to my new images. Please make sure you're putting those apostrophes so I know which one's which. What would my new coordinates for my P be? Good, -2, -3. What about Q? 1, -2, and R? 3. 3 what? -1? +1, good. All right, I got those coordinates, and now I'm doing my last one. 180 degrees about the origin. So that means I'm rotating 180 degrees from the origin. Normally the 181, you're not switching them. You're not switching your X or your Y. You're just changing the sign. If it's 90, you're going to switch them, and if it's 270, you're going to switch them. So doing the same thing, I have P, Q, and R. -2, 3. 1, 2, 3, -1. All right, who could tell me the coordinates for my P? Good, +2, -3. What about Q? Good, and the last one R? -3, 1. Good. All right, so I know all my pre-images and my image coordinates. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide and graph them. These are the graphs of the images. We have translations at the top, so this is a slide. Then we have our reflections and our rotations. These coordinates I took from the previous slide, and then I had you guys try and graph them on your own.